What would you do if the world turned against you for simply sitting in the seat you paid for on a crowded flight bound for New York? One man boarded quietly, just another passenger in first class. But within minutes, an entitled heiress decided he didn't belong there. Her arrogance turned to violence. Her father's empire turned to lies, and soon, a decorated air marshal named Jonathan Miles found himself painted as the villain in a story he never asked to star in. The slap was only the beginning. Cameras captured it, passengers whispered about it, and the nation divided over it. But behind the headlines was a deeper question. How far will power go to bury the truth, and can one man, calm yet unyielding, stand tall enough to bring an entire system crashing down? This is not just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's a story about dignity under fire, courage in the face of lies, and the unshakable weight of justice. If you believe the truth still matters, stay with us. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that reveal not just what happened, but why it matters. The terminal at JFK buzzed with the usual chaos of a Monday morning. Wheels of carry-ons rattled against polished floors. Boarding announcements echoed through speakers, and the smell of burnt espresso drifted from the coffee kiosk near Gate 47. For most travelers, it was just another flight. But for Jonathan Miles, it was another quiet test of patience and discipline. Jonathan adjusted the strap of his leather satchel as he waited in the priority line for Skyreach Airlines Flight 782 to Los Angeles. Dressed in a charcoal blazer and open-collared shirt, he blended easily among the first-class passengers' business executives, seasoned flyers, and the occasional celebrity in oversized sunglasses. No one would guess that beneath his calm presence, he carried the authority of a federal air marshal, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He had learned, over 20 years in service, that invisibility was power, to move unseen, to observe quietly, to intervene only when the balance of order cracked. That was his role. Today, however, he carried a gnawing unease in his chest, the kind that whispered trouble was near. He couldn't explain it, but experience had taught him to trust the quiet alarms of instinct. The line shifted forward. Jonathan offered a polite smile to the boarding agent as she scanned his ticket. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Miles, seat 2A. Her tone was warm, professional. He nodded and stepped through, tucking his ticket back into his jacket pocket. Just behind him, a voice rose sharp, dismissive, dripping with entitlement. "Excuse me, are you seriously going to make me wait behind all these people? Do you even know who I am?" Jonathan glanced back. A young woman in designer heels and a tailored cream coat leaned over the counter, glaring at the agent. Her platinum hair gleamed under the terminal lights. Her phone clutched like a weapon. Passengers nearby exchanged uneasy looks, some stepping aside instinctively. "I need to be boarded immediately," she demanded. "My father is Richard Doyle. Yes, that Doyle, CEO of Skyreach. And if you think I'm standing in line like some tourists think again." The agent's face stiffened. She opened her mouth to respond, but the woman, Catherine Doyle, was already rolling her eyes, muttering something about incompetence. With a snap of her wrist, she waved her phone like a badge of status. Jonathan exhaled quietly, shifting his gaze forward. He had seen this pattern before, power dressed as arrogance, entitlement sharpened into cruelty. It never failed to sour the air around it. He debated stepping aside, letting her pass, but something in her tone, something casually venomous, clawed at him. He steadied himself, reminding his heart, "Stay calm. Observe. Don't react unless you must." The boarding agent, cornered by Catherine's tirade, finally motioned her through. Catherine swept past with a triumphant smirk, her perfume trailing in her wake like smoke. As she passed Jonathan, her eyes brushed him briefly cold, dismissive, as though scanning a shadow on the wall. She tilted her chin upward and muttered, just loud enough, unbelievable. First class isn't what it used to be. Jonathan caught the words. He said nothing. His jaw tightened slightly, but he let the insult hang in the air, weightless, powerless at least for now. Inside the jet bridge, the hum of engines grew louder, a steady heartbeat of steel and sky. The line moved slowly, passengers shuffling forward. Jonathan's thoughts wandered briefly to his late father, who used to remind him that dignity wasn't about how the world treated you, but how you carried yourself when the world tried to strip you down. It was a lesson he clung to often, especially in moments like this. He entered the cabin, greeted by the soft glow of recessed lights and the faint aroma of leather seats. First class on Skyreach was pristine wide recliners, crisp white headrest covers, champagne glasses perched on trays. He spotted 2A, window seat, his sanctuary for the next 6 hours. He placed his satchel neatly in the overhead bin, slid into his seat, and allowed a breath of relief to settle. That relief lasted only seconds. A sharp voice cut through the cabin. "Excuse me, what are you doing in my seat?" Jonathan turned. Catherine Doyle stood in the aisle, one hand on her hip, the other gripping her boarding pass like a verdict. Her eyes narrowed at him, radiating offense. Around them, the cabin hushed. Other passengers lowered newspapers, tilted their heads, watching. Jonathan spoke evenly. "This is seat 2A. My boarding pass confirms it." Catherine let out a scoff that could slice glass. "No, this is my seat. My father always arranges it. And I don't know what kind of mix-up this is, but clearly you've made a mistake." Jonathan retrieved his pass, holding it out calmly. "It's printed right here. 2A. She didn't look at the ticket. She didn't need to. Her sneer said everything she had already decided: his place wasn't here. "You think a piece of paper means you belong in this seat?" Her voice dripped with disdain. "Look around. Do you honestly believe you fit here?" The words, weighted with unspoken venom, rippled through the cabin. Jonathan felt every gaze pressing against him. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, others avoided eye contact entirely. The silence was heavier than thunder. Inside, Jonathan's thoughts wrestled. Ignore her. Don't let her bait you. But if you yield now, what do you tell yourself tomorrow? That silence is dignity, or that silence is surrender? His father's voice echoed. There is strength in patience, but there is also danger in letting lies stand unchallenged. Jonathan drew a slow breath. "Ma'am," he said, steady but firm. "This is my seat." Catherine's lips curled. She stepped closer, towering over him despite her small frame. "Listen, I don't care what you think your ticket says. I always sit here, always. And if you know what's good for you, you'll move. Now." The cabin froze again. Time suspended between two heartbeats. Jonathan's hand brushed the edge of his jacket, where his badge rested unseen. But revealing it wasn't his first step. Not yet. He needed to measure, to weigh, to give her every chance to retreat from the precipice she was creating. He leaned back in his seat, eyes never leaving hers. Respectfully, "Miss Doyle, I'm not moving." Her face flushed crimson, for a moment. Her expression flickered shock, disbelief, then rage. And with that rage came the spark that would ignite everything to follow. Passengers held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Every eye flicked between Catherine Doyle and Jonathan Miles, waiting for one to give in, waiting for the tension to snap. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the silence like static. A flight attendant, frozen near the galley, hesitated to step in. Jonathan sat still, his back against the leather headrest of 2A. Years of training told him not to move too quickly, not to escalate. His father's voice whispered again in his memory, "Dignity comes not from shouting, but from standing firm when others expect you to fold." Catherine shifted her weight onto one heel, her designer coat falling open to reveal a silk blouse that shimmered under the cabin lights. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine shoot, but the venom in her eyes burned through the glossy facade. She leaned closer, her perfume sharp, invasive. "You heard me," she said, her voice a hiss meant to cut. "Get out of my seat, now." Jonathan held her gaze, calm, steady, deliberate. "This seat is assigned to me. I'm not moving." Her laugh was short, brittle, almost unhinged. "Do you even realize who you're talking to? My father owns this airline. This seat has always been mine." She waved her boarding pass, but didn't actually look at it. A businessman in seat 3A coughed awkwardly, muttering under his breath, "Just check the pass. Lady." But Catherine ignored him, eyes locked on Jonathan as though he were the only obstacle in her world. Jonathan's fingers rested on his knees. He thought of the 100 flights before this one, the countless times he had blended into the crowd, unseen, unnoticed. That anonymity was his armor. But now, the spotlight was burning down on him, demanding a response. He thought of his badge, the authority tucked discreetly inside his jacket. To use it was to escalate, to strip away the calm facade he always wore. Catherine tilted her head, her lips curving into something cruel. "People like you don't belong in this cabin," she whispered. The words struck deeper than she could have known. Jonathan felt the sting, sharp and hot, but he let it wash over him like a wave against stone. His heart pounded, but his face betrayed nothing. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some pulled out their phones, sensing drama. Others ducked behind newspapers, unwilling to be part of it. The flight attendant finally stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Ma'am, perhaps we should verify the seat assignment before—" "Don't you dare interrupt me," Catherine snapped, turning her fury on the attendant. "This is my seat. If he won't move, then you'll move him. Call security if you have to. My father will hear about this." The attendant froze, her cheeks coloring with embarrassment. Jonathan inhaled slowly, letting the breath settle deep in his chest. His internal voice rose, "Stay calm. Don't let her drag you into her storm. But don't let her rewrite the truth, either." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his boarding pass, and held it up for everyone to see. "Seat 2A. My name is Jonathan Miles. That's what's printed right here." Silence followed. Catherine's eyes flicked to the paper but never focused. Instead, her hand shot out, knocking the boarding pass away. The flimsy slip fluttered to the floor between them. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Jonathan's pulse thudded in his ears, but his voice remained level. "Ma'am, that was unnecessary." "Unnecessary?" Catherine's voice rose, shrill now, trembling with anger. "What's unnecessary is you sitting where you don't belong." And then it happened. Her hand, sharp and sudden, lashed out. The crack of her palm against his cheek cut through the cabin louder than any announcement. The world froze. The sting burned across Jonathan's face, hot and humiliating. His vision narrowed, his body tensed. For a split second, instinct screamed at him to react, to rise, to show her the strength she mocked. His military training clawed at him control the threat, neutralize the attacker. But another voice cut through, softer, steadier his father's again. Strength isn't in striking back. Strength is in choosing when to act, and why. Jonathan sat perfectly still. He let the silence stretch. He let the weight of her action hang in the air for everyone to witness. The flight attendant gasped, hands trembling as she pressed them to her mouth. The businessman in 3A muttered, "Oh my God," while fumbling with his phone to hit record. Catherine, breathing hard, seemed almost satisfied with herself. She lifted her chin, as if daring him to respond. "That's better," she whispered. "Now get out." Jonathan's heart hammered, but his face was calm. His mind wrestled in silence. Do I let this go, swallow the humiliation, keep the peace, or do I stand, not for myself alone, but for the principle I swore to uphold? He thought of the badge resting against his chest, the oath he had taken. Protect, serve, uphold the law without bias or fear. That badge wasn't just metal, it was responsibility. The silence grew unbearable. Passengers leaned forward, phones raised, capturing every angle. The cabin felt like a courtroom, every eye a juror, every breath waiting for his verdict. Jonathan's hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into his jacket. His fingers brushed the badge, the cool metal steady against his skin. He hesitated, one last flicker of doubt whispering in his mind. If you show this, the world will know. There's no turning back. Are you ready for the storm it will unleash? He closed his eyes briefly. He saw his father's face, stern but kind. He heard the words that had carried him through every battle. Justice doesn't wait for comfort. It demands courage, even when the world turns against you. Jonathan opened his eyes, calm, resolved. He withdrew the badge and held it up high, the silver glint catching the cabin lights. Gasps erupted. The flight attendant's eyes widened. The businessman in 3A whispered, "Holy, he's a Marshal." Phones captured the moment, lenses zooming in on the emblem of authority. Jonathan's voice was steady, unwavering, each word carrying the weight of law. "Catherine Doyle, you are under arrest for assaulting a federal officer." The cabin exploded in murmurs, disbelief and awe crashing together. Some passengers cheered softly, others muttered in shock. Catherine's face drained of color, then flushed red again in fury. "You can't be serious. You can't arrest me. I'm not going anywhere." My father Jonathan's tone cut through, calm but commanding. "Your father's name doesn't place you above the law. You struck a federal officer. That is a crime." The words echoed, sinking into every corner of the cabin. Catherine backed away a step, her arrogance faltering. Her eyes darted to the phones pointed at her, the passengers recording every flinch. For the first time, she looked unsure. Jonathan rose slowly, controlled, never rushing. His presence filled the aisle, steady as stone. He slipped handcuffs from his satchel, a discreet Marshal's kit, and held them ready. The flight attendant's voice trembled as she reached for the intercom. "Captain, we have a situation in first class." The businessman in 3A leaned back, shaking his head with a low whistle. "She messed with the wrong guy." Jonathan's inner voice whispered, "This is only the beginning. She'll fight harder. Her father will fight hardest. But you've drawn the line. Now you have to hold it." As the aircraft idled on the tarmac, every passenger in first class knew they were witnessing more than a squabble over a seat. They were watching a collision between entitlement and justice, between privilege and the rule of law. Jonathan clicked the cuffs once, the metallic snap punctuating the silence. "Catherine Doyle," he said, his voice calm but final. "Remain seated. We're returning to the gate." Her mouth opened in protest, but the words died under the weight of the badge glinting in his hand. The storm had begun. The silence inside the cabin stretched until it became unbearable. Jonathan Miles stood in the narrow aisle, his badge glinting under the overhead lights, his voice echoing with calm authority. "Catherine Doyle, you are under arrest for assaulting a federal officer." Passengers whispered in disbelief. Some gasped. Others raised their phones higher, determined to capture every second. The businessman in 3A leaned forward, shaking his head as though he had just witnessed history. The air was electric, charged with both fear and awe. Catherine froze for a heartbeat. Her face drained of color. Her hand trembled on an armrest. Then the mask of privilege snapped back into place. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice trembling between rage and disbelief. "You can't do this to me. My father will bury you." Jonathan didn't flinch. He had heard those words before, in different forms, from people who believed money and power made them untouchable. But here, at 30,000 feet, or in this case, still idling on the tarmac, law was supposed to remain the same. He reminded himself dignity and restraint, strength and calm. He spoke evenly, like a judge delivering a verdict. "Your father's position does not exempt you from the law. You struck a federal officer. That is a criminal offense." The murmurs grew louder. A woman in 1C whispered to her husband, "She actually slapped him." "I saw it," another passenger muttered. "About time someone put her in her place." Catherine's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for an ally, anyone to echo her indignation. But every face she met carried either judgment or silence. The power she once wielded so effortlessly had evaporated into thin air. Jonathan took one step closer. His movements were deliberate, measured, controlled. He held the cuffs loosely, not as a threat, but as a promise of procedure. "Remain seated," he instructed. "Do not escalate this further." The flight attendant near the galley fumbled with the intercom, her voice cracking as she called the cockpit. "Captain Monroe, we have a situation. Passenger in first class arrest in progress. Please advise." A pause, then the captain's voice, deep and steady, came through. "Understood. Return into gate immediately. Maintain order in the cabin." The announcement shifted the atmosphere. Passengers exchanged looks, half relief, half anticipation. They knew the drama was far from over. Catherine shot up from her seat, fury blazing in her eyes. "No, we're not going back. You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone." She turned toward the other passengers, desperate to reclaim control. "You're all witnesses. He's abusing his power. He attacked me first. Her words faltered when she realized no one was nodding. No one was coming to her defense. Phones stayed raised. Eyes remained fixed on her. For the first time, she was on the wrong side of the lens. Jonathan stepped into her line of sight, his tone calm but unyielding. "Catherine Doyle, sit down. Right now." Something in his voice cut through her tantrum. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. She froze, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on the badge. Slowly, reluctantly, she sank back into her seat, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles whitened. Jonathan lowered the cuffs but didn't put them away. He addressed the passengers, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. This aircraft will be returning to the gate. Please remain seated and calm. Safety is our priority." A ripple of nods spread through the cabin. The businessman in 3A gave him a small, approving nod. A woman whispered, "Thank you," just loud enough for him to hear. Inside, Jonathan's heart still hammered. His cheek still burned where she had struck him. He could feel the weight of every camera on him, every pair of eyes measuring his every move. "You've crossed the line now, Jonathan," he thought. "There's no turning back. This won't end here." The plane jolted slightly as the captain steered it off the taxiway. Catherine leaned toward him again, her voice low, venomous. "Do you know what you've just done? My father will destroy you. You'll lose your badge. You'll lose everything." Jonathan met her gaze, his eyes calm but resolute. "If doing my duty costs me everything, then so be it." Her jaw dropped, caught off guard by his composure. She sat back, seething, but her words carried less weight now, less certainty. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, Jonathan remained standing, his posture steady. The flight attendant returned, her eyes wide with both fear and admiration. "Marshal Miles," she whispered. "Do you want me to move her to the back?" Jonathan nodded once. "Yes, rear cabin, away from other passengers." Catherine's mouth fell open. "You can't stand," Jonathan ordered. The authority in his voice was undeniable. She rose reluctantly, glaring at the passengers who filmed her every step. Jonathan walked behind her, his presence a shadow pressing her forward. Together, they moved down the aisle, whispers following like a trail of smoke. At the rear of the aircraft, Jonathan directed her into an empty row. "Sit, hands on the tray table. Don't move until security boards." She obeyed, though her glare could have cut glass. Jonathan returned to first class, the cabin now buzzing with hushed conversation. The businessman leaned over. "You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen." She didn't know who she was messing with. Jonathan gave a polite nod, but his mind was already racing ahead. He knew Catherine's words weren't empty. Richard Doyle, CEO of Skyreach Airlines, wielded more power than most politicians. He would not let this slide. And Jonathan, by choosing to uphold the law, had just painted a target on his own back. As the plane docked back at the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an onboard incident, we will be deplaning shortly. Please remain seated until security arrives." Jonathan's pulse quickened. The cameras, the passengers, the witnesses, they would all matter. But power had a way of rewriting stories, twisting truth into lies. He knew what was coming: denial, spin, retaliation. He steadied himself, pressing a palm against his chest where the badge rested. "You chose this. You stand by it, no matter the cost." Minutes later, airport security officers boarded, their radios crackling. Passengers pointed them toward the back, where Catherine sat with arms crossed, her face a storm of fury and humiliation. Jonathan stepped forward, presenting his badge. "Air Marshal Jonathan Miles. Suspect is detained for assaulting a federal officer. I'll file my report." The lead officer nodded, exchanging a look of recognition. "We'll take it from here." "Marshal," Catherine exploded, "this is insane. Do you know who my father is? I demand you release me right now." But her protests fell on deaf ears. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every word, every gesture, every ounce of rage. The internet was about to have its feast. As the officers escorted her off the plane, Jonathan sank back into seat 2A. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself a long, heavy breath. The passengers still whispered around him, some offering quiet thanks, others simply staring in awe. He stared out the window, watching the gate crew move in the distance, the morning sun glinting off the fuselage. He knew this was far from over. In fact, this was just the beginning. "Jonathan," his inner voice whispered, "you've unleashed a storm, and storms don't pass quietly." The jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft with a dull metallic clank. Passengers whispered anxiously, some craning their necks toward the back of the plane where Catherine Doyle sat flanked by 2 security officers. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, her designer coat wrinkled under the weight of humiliation. Phones were still raised, lenses waiting to capture the next eruption. Jonathan Miles sat quietly in seat 2A, hands folded in his lap, his badge now tucked away. The adrenaline still buzzed in his veins, but on the surface he was stone calm. He knew appearances mattered more than anything now. Every move, every word, every expression would be scrutinized later. The cameras never blinked, and neither did the court of public opinion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harris Monroe's voice boomed through the intercom, steady but taut. "Due to an onboard incident, we have returned to the gate. Please remain seated until instructed to disembark." The cabin erupted into murmurs. A child asked his mother what was happening. An elderly man muttered about missing his connection. But most passengers spoke in hushed tones about Catherine, about the slap, about the badge. Some praised Jonathan for his composure. Others whispered fears about the fallout. Jonathan leaned back against the headrest, closing his eyes for a moment. His cheek still throbbed faintly from the slap, but the pain was nothing compared to the storm he felt building outside this cabin. Catherine's threats echoed in his mind her father's name, her certainty that power would shield her. Jonathan knew too well that such certainty wasn't baseless. Richard Doyle wasn't just CEO of Skyreach Airlines. He was one of the most powerful corporate figures in the country. A man whose phone calls could bend regulations, whose donations shaped political campaigns. Jonathan's training told him to focus only on the task, detain, report, hand over to ground security. But his instincts told him something larger was already unfolding, something that would reach far beyond this flight. The cabin door opened. A pair of uniformed Skyreach supervisors stepped in, their eyes sweeping the first-class cabin. One carried a tablet, already buzzing with messages. They spoke quickly with the security officers escorting Catherine, their voices hushed but urgent. Then, Catherine's phone rang. The officers hesitated, but she snatched it from her coat pocket, defiance blazing in her eyes. "Daddy." Her voice cracked with a blend of rage and fear. "They've arrested me. Yes, on your airline. No, I didn't do anything. He hit me, he attacked me, and now he's parading me like a criminal in front of everyone." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. He knew better than to argue with her lies in that moment. Her words weren't aimed at him. They were aimed at the lifeline on the other end of that call. Passengers leaned in, catching fragments of the conversation. Catherine's voice grew louder, desperate. "Fix this, Daddy, right now, or I swear I'll—" She stopped abruptly, listening. Then she smirked, her confidence flickering back to life. "Good. I knew you'd handle it." She lowered the phone slowly, staring at Jonathan with a smile that chilled the air between them. "You're finished," she whispered. The supervisors escorted her off the plane, cameras following like vultures. The passengers erupted into chatter, some sighing in relief, others debating what they had just witnessed. Jonathan stayed seated. His heart told him to relax now, to let the system take over. But his mind reminded him of reality systems were fragile things, easily bent, easily bought. A flight attendant approached nervously. "Marshal Miles, Captain Monroe would like a word with you in the cockpit." Jonathan rose, adjusting his jacket, and made his way forward. The cockpit door opened, and he stepped inside. Captain Monroe, a seasoned pilot with salt and pepper hair, looked up from his seat, his brow furrowed. "Marshal," Monroe began, his voice low. "I've received instructions from corporate. They're unusual." Jonathan's stomach tightened. What kind of instructions? Monroe exchanged a glance with his co-pilot, then sighed. "They want us to remove you from duty, immediately. They're saying you escalated the situation, that your conduct was inappropriate." Jonathan stared at him, unblinking. "You saw what happened?" Monroe nodded. "I did. And I know the truth. But orders are orders. They're demanding a written statement from me that supports their narrative." His voice faltered. "I don't like it. It feels wrong. But you need to know Richard Doyle has already called the corporate office. He's moving fast." Jonathan felt the weight of inevitability press down. Catherine's smirk wasn't arrogance alone. It was knowledge. She had known her father would unleash his power the moment she called him. He steadied his breath. "Captain, do what you have to do. But remember, the passengers saw everything. Their cameras don't lie." Monroe's eyes softened, respect flickering beneath the conflict. "For what it's worth, Marshal, I admire how you handled yourself. I'll tell the truth, even if they don't like it." Jonathan nodded once, then stepped back into the cabin. The flight attendants glanced at him nervously, whispering behind their hands. The businessmen in 3A leaned over as Jonathan passed. "They're already spinning it, aren't they?" Jonathan didn't answer. He sank into 2A again, his gaze fixed on the window. The tarmac bustled with the ground crew, but inside the plane the air felt thick, suffocating. Passengers began to deplane in an orderly line. Some paused by Jonathan's seat to whisper words of encouragement. "Stay strong. We've got your back. I filmed everything." Each voice was a small anchor against the rising tide of doubt. Yet Jonathan's mind still wrestled. How far can truth travel against money? How long before their videos are buried under headlines crafted by a PR machine? When the cabin finally emptied, Jonathan stood, collecting his satchel. He moved down the jet bridge, past clusters of gawking employees. At the end stood two men in dark suits, corporate security, their posture rigid, their expressions blank. Marshal Miles, one asked flatly, "You're requested in the operations office. Now." Jonathan followed, his footsteps echoing against the sterile corridor. The office was small, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A Skyreach executive sat behind the desk, his smile thin and rehearsed. "Marshal Miles," he began smoothly, "we're grateful for your service, but the incident earlier has raised serious concerns. Effective immediately. You're placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Please surrender your badge and firearm." The words cut sharper than Catherine's slap. Jonathan felt heat flood his chest, but his face remained unreadable. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket, unpinned the badge he had carried for years, and set it on the desk. The weight of it, leaving his hand, felt heavier than any burden he'd carried. The executive slid the badge into a drawer, closing it with a click that sounded like a verdict. "We'll be in touch," he said. Jonathan turned, his satchel slung over his shoulder. He walked out without a word, his steps steady, though inside a storm raged. "They've started rewriting the story already, and if I don't fight back, the truth will vanish." Outside the terminal, sunlight glared off the pavement. Travelers bustled past, oblivious to the battle that had just begun. Jonathan paused, inhaling deeply, the scent of jet fuel and coffee mingling in the air. He reminded himself storms could be weathered, lies could be fought. But it would take more than patience now. It would take courage louder than money, stronger than power. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit the screen. "We saw what happened. We have proof. Call us." Jonathan stared at the message, his pulse quickening. Somewhere, allies were waiting, and the storm, as fierce as it was, might not swallow him whole. Not if he stood his ground. Richard Doyle's office in Manhattan was a palace of glass and steel, a corner suite overlooking the city skyline. The CEO of Skyreach Airlines stood with his back to the window, phone pressed tightly to his ear, his jaw clenched. He listened as his daughter's voice spilled through the line, frantic, laced with rage and fear. "Daddy, he humiliated me in front of everyone. He put his hands on me, called me a criminal in front of first-class passengers. They all saw it. He's lying. You have to fix this. Do something." Richard's eyes narrowed. He had built his empire by controlling narratives, by bending reality until it fit the story he wanted told. This would be no different. His daughter's voice, shaken and indignant, only steeled his resolve. "Listen to me, Catherine," he said, calm but cold. "I'll handle this. Keep quiet. Don't talk to anyone without my say. Do you understand?" "Yes, Daddy," she whispered, the tremor in her tone fading as she clung to his authority. When the call ended, Richard turned to the team assembled in his office, his chief communications officer, head of legal, and 2 senior PR strategists. Their laptops were already open, news feeds scrolling, alerts pinging as the first shaky passenger videos from the Flight 782 began appearing online. "Damage control," Richard said flatly. "We flood the zone before this story takes root. I want headlines by noon. He's the aggressor. She's the victim. Make it happen." The communications officer hesitated. "Sir, the videos are spreading fast. They clearly show your daughter slapping him." Richard's gaze was icy. "Then you cut the clip, blur it, question the context, call it edited. Use words like allegedly, and push every outlet we own to run with it. I don't care what it takes, this Marshal Miles will not define my daughter, or this airline." The room fell into motion. Emails flew. Phone calls lit up. Within an hour, the first headlines appeared. Air Marshal oversteps passenger claims abuse of power on Skyreach flight heiress, humiliated by federal officer in first-class clash. Sources passenger assaulted by armed air marshal. By afternoon, talk show hosts debated whether federal officers were given too much authority. Catherine's face appeared on a morning program, her eyes wide and glistening with rehearsed vulnerability. "He grabbed me," she said, her voice trembling just enough to appear authentic. "I was terrified. I thought I was going to be hurt. I only tried to protect myself." Jonathan Miles watched from his living room in Queens, the television glowing against the dim light of dusk. His badge and firearm had already been surrendered. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together, his chest heavy with disbelief. The reporter's voice narrated over footage of Catherine walking briskly from the airport, shielded by security. Catherine Doyle, daughter of Skyreach CEO Richard Doyle, claimed she was physically intimidated by Air Marshal Jonathan Miles. The airline is investigating whether Miles escalated the incident unnecessarily. Jonathan rubbed his temples. The sting on his cheek had faded, but the sting of injustice had only grown sharper. He thought of the passengers who had filmed everything, of the businessman in 3A who had muttered she messed with the wrong guy. Where were those videos now? Why weren't they being shown? His phone buzzed. A text from Maya Chen, the TSA supervisor who had seen Catherine berate the gate agent earlier that morning. "I know the truth. Jonathan, don't let them crush you. We'll fight this." He stared at the message, his heart tightening with gratitude. He needed allies, because right now the machine was already grinding him down. The news cycle spun faster. Commentators painted Jonathan as a hot-headed officer, unfit for first-class passengers. Social media accounts tied to Skyreach began pushing hashtags, "abuse of power." Passengers first. Jonathan turned off the TV, the silence of his apartment suffocating. He stared at his reflection in the darkened window. His father's words returned like a whisper from memory. "They will try to bury you, but the truth is heavier than their lies. Stand tall, son." Yet doubt gnawed at him. Could truth really outweigh billions of dollars? An empire of influence, could a single man resist a corporation built on spin and intimidation? The next morning, Jonathan walked into the federal building for his suspension hearing. A panel of officials sat behind a long table, their faces stiff. A senior officer cleared his throat. "Marshal Miles, given the public allegations and pending investigation, you are relieved of all duties effective immediately. This is not a determination of guilt, but a precautionary measure. Your credentials will remain suspended until further notice." Jonathan nodded once, hiding the knot twisting in his stomach. He handed over his ID card, the weight of it leaving his hand heavier than when he had first received it. As he left the building, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions fired like bullets. "Marshal Miles, did you assault Catherine Doyle? Do you regret escalating the situation? Are you prepared to lose your career over this?" He pushed through silently, his face calm, though his insides roiled. He refused to feed the machine with sound bites. Silence was his only weapon now. That evening, Catherine appeared again on television, this time sitting across from a popular primetime host. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her voice quivering. "All I wanted was to sit in my seat." Suddenly, he towered over me, his badge flashing, his handcuffs ready. I thought I was going to be dragged off like a criminal. I was terrified. The host leaned forward sympathetically. "You're very brave for sharing this. Do you feel safe now?" Catherine nodded, her performance flawless. "I just want people to know no one should be abused like that." Jonathan turned the TV off again, his jaw tight. He wanted to scream, to shout the truth into the world, but instead, he sat quietly, his thoughts spiraling inward. If I fight, I risk everything. If I stay silent, their lies become the truth. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize. A voicemail followed Mr. Miles, this is Samuel Vega. I'm a civil rights attorney. I've seen the footage they're suppressing. You're not alone in this. Call me. Jonathan played the message twice, then sat back, staring at the ceiling. His chest rose and fell in a long, heavy breath. The machine was vast, merciless, and fast. But maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't buried yet. Maybe it only needed the right hands to uncover it. For now, though, the headlines screamed louder than his silence, and the storm outside his apartment window mirrored the storm inside his heart, restless, violent, and impossible to ignore. Jonathan Miles woke before dawn, his apartment heavy with silence. The city outside was still groggy, its usual noise replaced by the distant hum of delivery trucks and the occasional honk of an impatient cab. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the glow of his phone screen. Messages stacked up like bricks news alerts, missed calls, texts from unknown numbers. Most were cruel, venomous words from strangers who had swallowed the narrative spun by Richard Doyle's machine. He scrolled through them, each one a cut, power-tripping cop, disgrace to the badge, hope you never fly again. Jonathan placed the phone face down, shutting out the noise. His cheek no longer hurt, but the weight inside him was heavier than any bruise. His whole career, 2 decades of quiet service, countless flights, silent sacrifices was being dismantled by a lie. The knock at his door startled him. 3 sharp raps. He rose cautiously, peering through the peephole. Maya Chen stood in the hallway, her expression taut with determination. Jonathan opened the door. Maya, what are you doing here? She stepped inside without hesitation, her voice low but fierce. You need support, and I'm not going to watch them bury you. Jonathan exhaled, closing the door behind her. You saw what happened at the gate. Maya, you know how she treated that agent, but they've twisted it. They've made me the villain. Maya sat across from him, placing a folder on the table. I filed my own report. I described everything I witnessed, her entitlement, her aggression. And I'm not the only one. The gate agent's willing to speak, too. But we'll need more than that. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. More. She leaned forward, her voice steady. We need legal firepower. Someone who isn't afraid to take on Richard Doyle. I know someone, Samuel Vega, civil rights attorney. He's been fighting cases like this his entire career. He reached out to me after seeing the suppressed footage. Jonathan hesitated. He'd always been self-reliant, a man who handled storms alone, but this wasn't just a storm. It was a hurricane fueled by billions of dollars. Do you trust him? With my life, Maya said, and you need someone in your corner. Jonathan. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about every person they've silenced before. Jonathan's silence stretched. He rubbed his palms together, wrestling with the weight of choice. Part of him wanted to disappear, to let the tide swallow the story and retreat into anonymity. But another part, the part his father had nurtured, knew surrender wasn't an option. Set up a meeting, he finally said. Later that afternoon, Jonathan found himself in a quiet office in Brooklyn. The walls lined with books, framed photos of marches and protests, plaques recognizing victories in court. Samuel Vega rose to greet him, a tall man with graying hair and eyes that radiated both warmth and steel. "Mr. Miles," Samuel said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've been waiting to meet you. Sit down." Jonathan studied him. There was no rehearsed charm, no PR polish, just conviction. It steadied him. Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I've seen the footage. Jonathan. Not the edited clips floating around the networks, the real thing. Passengers sent me copies before Skyreach's lawyers pressured them to delete. It's clear as day. She slapped you. You remained calm. You followed procedure. They're smearing you because the truth threatens them." Jonathan's chest tightened. "Then why isn't the truth out there?" Samuel's mouth curved in a bitter smile. "Because they're faster, louder, and richer. They own media channels, they buy silence. But here's the thing, they can't erase all of it. Enough people recorded that flight. Enough saw what happened with their own eyes. We just need to amplify their voices." Maya, sitting beside Jonathan, nodded. "The gate agent and I will testify. We'll back him up." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "And what happens if I fight?" "What happens to me," Samuel didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll dig into your past. Every flight, every report, every mistake you've ever made. They'll paint you as unstable, dangerous, a man who cracked under pressure. They'll try to ruin your name before you ever step into a courtroom. But if you stand firm, if you refuse to be broken, we can turn this tide. Not just for you, for everyone who's been dismissed, silenced, or stepped over." Jonathan's mind swirled. The idea of his life dissected, of old wounds reopened, chilled him. But he also felt a spark, small, fragile, but real. For the first time since Catherine's slap, he felt like the truth had a chance. Samuel continued, his tone deliberate. "We start by gathering every witness we can. Passenger statements, video evidence, testimonies. Then we file a civil suit not just against Catherine Doyle, but against Skyreach for enabling misconduct and retaliation. That's how we force the story into the light." Jonathan rubbed his chin, the weight of the decision pressing on him. "And if they destroy me in the process," Samuel's gaze didn't waver, "then you'll have gone down fighting for something bigger than yourself. But I believe, Jonathan, I truly believe you can win this." The room fell into a quiet charged with possibility. Maya placed a hand gently on Jonathan's arm. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. He saw his father's face in his memory, proud and unyielding. He heard the echo of his voice. "Stand tall, son. Even when the world tries to cut you down, stand tall." When he opened his eyes, there was steel in them. "All right," he said. "Let's fight." Samuel leaned back, a flicker of a smile crossing his lips. "Good. Then the first move is ours. That night." Jonathan walked back to his apartment through streets alive with neon and the hum of traffic. For the first time in days, he felt a sliver of hope. But hope was quickly tempered by fear. He knew Richard Doyle wouldn't back down. The man would unleash every weapon in his arsenal: money, influence, lies. Jonathan paused at a crosswalk, watching the red glow of the signal. Am I ready for this? Am I ready to become the face of a fight I never asked for? The signal turned green. He stepped forward. Somewhere deep inside, his answer had already been written. The following morning, Jonathan Miles sat in Samuel Vega's office once again, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. He hadn't slept well, the echoes of Catherine Doyle's lies playing like broken tape in his mind. But today, he felt something steadier beneath the exhaustion purpose. Samuel spread papers across the desk, printouts of social media posts, transcripts from news clips, passenger statements collected discreetly overnight. "Here's where we stand," he said, his tone sharp, every word deliberate. "They're pushing their narrative faster than wildfire, but we've got embers they can't smother." Jonathan leaned forward, scanning the documents. Some passengers had already posted publicly, describing what they had seen. The woman slapped him, and he stayed calm. The Marshal was professional. Skyreach is lying. Jonathan's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and dread. Gratitude for the strangers defending him. Dread for what Richard Doyle would do to silence them. They'll try to intimidate these people. Samuel continued. Corporate lawyers will call, threaten lawsuits, hint at revoked frequent flyer accounts. We need to lock them in affidavits, sworn statements before the pressure reaches them. Maya Chen, seated across the table, nodded firmly. The gate agent already told me corporate leaned on her. They offered her a transfer to another hub if she kept her mouth shut. She's scared, Jonathan, but she's willing to speak if she knows she won't be alone. Jonathan felt a pang of anger rise. He clenched his coffee cup, forcing himself to exhale slowly. They'll bury anyone who threatens the story. Not if we build our own story, Samuel said. We don't just defend you, we go on offense. We show that this isn't about one flight, one slap. This is about a system that protects privilege and punishes truth. Jonathan sat back, considering his words. He had never sought the spotlight. He had spent his career blending into the crowd, serving quietly. And now Samuel wanted to thrust him into the center of a storm. The idea made his stomach turn. Yet a voice inside whispered that it might be the only way. Samuel slid another file across the desk. "There's someone you need to meet. Elena Brooks. She works in Skyreach's finance division. She reached out anonymously last night, said she has documents showing internal directives to suppress passenger complaints, especially those involving bias or discrimination. If her evidence is real, it could change everything." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Why would she risk her career? Because Maya interjected. Sometimes the truth eats at people until they can't carry it anymore. Jonathan thought of his father again, of the lessons about dignity and truth. Maybe Elena was carrying the same burden he now carried, the knowledge that silence could become complicity. "Set up the meeting," Jonathan said, that afternoon, in a quiet diner far from corporate offices. Elena Brooks slid into the booth across from Jonathan, Samuel, and Maya. She looked nervous, her brown hair tied back, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. But there was a fire in her voice when she finally spoke. "I've worked for Skyreach for 6 years," Elena said, her hands trembling as she pulled a folder from her bag. "I know how they operate. Every time a complaint involves race, gender, or class, it gets flagged for special handling. That means it never sees daylight. Passengers are pacified with vouchers. Staff are silenced with threats, and executives rewrite the report before it reaches regulators." She pushed the folder across the table. "These are copies, emails, memos, accounting notes on settlements. They've paid millions to keep cases hidden, and Richard Doyle signed off on most of it." Jonathan flipped through the pages, his chest tightening with each line. Words like contain optics, risk, and minimize exposure leapt off the page. Proof of a machine designed to suffocate the truth. Samuel's eyes gleamed. This is gold. With this, we don't just defend Jonathan, we put Skyreach itself on trial. Elena's voice shook. I know what they'll do to me if they find out, but I can't keep pretending. Not after what happened to you. She looked at Jonathan, her expression raw. They thought they could humiliate you because they've done it before to people with less power, less visibility. Only this time, they picked the wrong man. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly. Thank you, Elena. I won't forget this. They left the diner with a new sense of urgency. Samuel already dialing contacts, Maya coordinating witness outreach, Elena slipping into the shadows with fear etched into her every step. Jonathan walked beside them, silent, but inside his heart churned. This is bigger than me now. This is war. That evening, Richard Doyle stood before a wall of cameras at a Skyreach press conference, polished and commanding in his tailored suit. Catherine sat beside him, her expression carefully groomed into victimhood. My daughter was assaulted and humiliated on one of our flights, Richard declared, his voice rich with authority. Skyreach will not stand for abuse of passengers, no matter who they are. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators to ensure justice is done. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Catherine dabbed her eyes delicately with a tissue. Jonathan watched the broadcast from Samuel's office, his fists tightening. He could see the lies woven seamlessly into every word, the performance calculated to bury him. But Samuel's voice broke through the storm. Let him talk. Let him spin. Because when we reveal what we have, his words will turn into a noose around his own neck. Maya placed a steady hand on Jonathan's shoulder. Hold on. The truth has weight. And, with Elena's documents, it's heavier than their lies. Jonathan stared at the screen, at Richard Doyle's confident face. Doubt still whispered at the edges of his mind. But, for the first time, conviction spoke louder. They think they've already won, Jonathan murmured, but they have no idea what's coming. The first cracks appeared within days. Jonathan Miles sat in Samuel Vega's office, the blinds half drawn against the morning sun. The air smelled of strong coffee and paper ink, a scent that clung to the legal files stacked high across the desk. Samuel looked grim as he read aloud from his phone. The businessman from seat 3A, the one who filmed the whole thing, just called me. He says Skyreach lawyers visited his office yesterday. They threatened to sue him for defamation if he releases the video publicly. They even hinted his company might lose its corporate travel contract if he didn't cooperate. Jonathan clenched his jaw. So, they're going after witnesses now. Maya Chen paced the room, her dark eyes burning with frustration. Of course they are. That's how Skyreach operates. They silence people until the truth disappears. The gate agent called me last night in tears. She said corporate offered her a cash bonus if she rewrote her statement. They're squeezing everyone. Elena Brooks sat quietly in the corner, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. She finally spoke, her voice low but steady. That's exactly what I warned you about. I watched it happen for years. Passenger files rewritten, staff intimidated. If someone pushed too hard, they were transferred or fired. They're efficient at erasing people. The weight of her words settled heavily over the room. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. His father's lessons echoed faintly in his memory. They will test you. They will press until you break. But you are stronger than their pressure. Samuel put his phone down and looked at Jonathan. We can't rely on witnesses alone. We need to secure the evidence ourselves. If that video from 3A goes dark, we're at risk, and Elena's documents, they'll be powerful in court, but only if we can protect her. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she lowered her mug. I've already seen an internal email about me. They suspect I leaked files. If they find out for sure, I'll lose my job. Maybe worse. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You did the right thing, Elena. You knew the truth mattered more than their threats. That takes courage. Her eyes softened, though fear still lingered. Courage doesn't feel like much when you're being hunted by your own company. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert flashing across Samuel's screen. He read it aloud, his voice tight. Breaking Sky Reach files countersuit against Air Marshal Jonathan Miles, citing misconduct, intimidation, and endangerment of passengers. The room fell silent. Jonathan exhaled, slow and steady, though inside his stomach nodded. So now I'm not just suspended. I'm officially their enemy. Samuel nodded grimly. That's how they'll try to crush you, bury you under legal fees, drag your name through the mud until you're radioactive. They're betting you'll fold before this ever reaches trial. Jonathan sat back, staring at the ceiling. Doubt whispered at the edges of his mind. Is this worth it? Is one slap on one flight worth destroying your life? But almost instantly, another voice rose to meet it, his father's again, warm and steady. This isn't about one slap, son. It's about every slap that came before, every one they think they can get away with tomorrow. He lowered his gaze, resolve hardening. Then we fight harder. Maya stopped pacing, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. That's what I wanted to hear. Later that afternoon, Jonathan sat alone in his apartment, staring at the growing stack of letters from federal investigators, lawyers, and media requests. His suspension check barely covered rent. The walls felt like they were closing in. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. Stop fighting. Drop your case, or we'll make sure you regret it. Jonathan stared at the words, his pulse quickening. He thought about deleting it, ignoring it, but then he saved the screenshot and sent it to Samuel. If they thought threats would scare him into silence, they didn't understand who they were dealing with. That evening, Maya called. Her voice was tight with urgency. Jonathan, we need to meet tomorrow morning. The businessman from 3A, he's having second thoughts. He's scared. We have to talk him back before they silence him completely. Jonathan agreed, though exhaustion weighed heavy on him. He hung up and walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed with restless energy, neon signs flickering against the night sky. He pressed a hand to the glass, his reflection staring back at him. You're tired, Jonathan, but you can't stop now. Too many people are counting on you. The next day, they met the witness. His name was Peter Caldwell in a quiet cafe. His hand shook as he stirred his coffee, eyes darting nervously toward the door. They came to my office. Peter whispered. 2 lawyers in suits. They said if I released the video, Skyreach would sue me personally for defamation and breach of contract. They said my company could lose millions in travel deals. I can't risk that. I have a family. Jonathan leaned in, his voice calm but urgent. Peter, I know they're trying to scare you, but the truth you hold, it's not just about me. It's about every passenger they've bullied. If you stay silent, they win. If you speak, You protect more than just yourself. You protect the principle that no one is above the law." Peter's eyes wavered. "But what if they destroy me?" Maya placed a hand on his arm. "That's why we're here. You won't be alone. We'll stand with you." Peter hesitated, then sighed heavily. "I'll think about it." Jonathan knew it wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a surrender either. Sometimes courage took time to grow. When they left the cafe, Samuel turned to Jonathan. "This is the battle. Right here. Their intimidation versus our resolve. If we can keep people like Peter from breaking, we have a chance." Jonathan nodded, though weariness pulled at him. "Then we don't let them break." That night, Jonathan sat at his desk, staring at a blank notebook page. He began to write, not a report, not a legal defense, but his own account of the truth. Every detail, every word spoken, every thought he'd held back in the cabin. He wrote for hours, the pen carving into the paper as if etching permanence against the erasure Sky Reach craved. When he finally stopped, his hand ached, but his chest felt lighter. The truth was now out of his head and onto the page. It couldn't be taken from him. He closed the notebook gently. The storm was far from over. In fact, it was only intensifying. But he felt a strange calm settle in. Pressure might bend others, but he would not be broken. Not now, not ever. The morning began with another storm of headlines. Jonathan Miles sat at his kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. The television across the room blared with commentary from yet another panel of polished experts. Sky Reach claims Marshal Miles escalated unnecessarily, one pundit declared, but now leaked clips suggest a different story. The videos are inconsistent. Yes, but some clearly show Catherine Doyle striking him first. Another panelist interrupted, her voice sharp. Let's not forget witnesses say he stayed calm. The question is, why is Sky Reach pushing so hard to discredit him? What are they afraid of? Jonathan muted the TV, his heart thumping. The tide was shifting, slowly but undeniably. His phone buzzed. It was Samuel Vega. "Jonathan, you need to come to the office. Now. Something's happening." Within an hour, Jonathan walked into Samuel's office, where Maya Chen and Elena Brooks were already seated. Samuel stood by the window, phone in hand, his expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Elena's documents leaked. Samuel announced, "Not by us, someone else." An anonymous drop to several independent journalists. They're running with it, emails, memos, everything. The world is finally seeing how Sky Reach buries complaints. Elena's face paled. "If they suspect it was me," Samuel shook his head, "they won't know for sure. The leak was scrubbed clean, but the damage is done. Headlines are shifting. Suddenly, this isn't about Jonathan alone. It's about a pattern of silencing." Jonathan sank into a chair, his chest heavy with both relief and worry. "So now they'll double down?" "Of course they will," Maya said, her arms crossed. "But cracks are showing. People are starting to question the Doyle family story. And once doubt sets in, it spreads like wildfire." Samuel nodded, "Which means it's time for us to push harder." "Jonathan, we're filing the civil suit tomorrow. Misconduct, retaliation, civil rights violations. Once it's public, they can't bury it." Jonathan rubbed his temples. "You know what this means. They'll come for me harder, and for Elena, too." Elena swallowed, her hands tightening around the edge of her chair. "They already are. Yesterday, my supervisor cornered me in the hallway. He told me I was playing a dangerous game. Today, I found a note on my desk, leave now before you regret it. Jonathan's stomach turned. He looked at her, his voice steady. You don't deserve this. You're risking everything for the truth. Elena met his gaze, fear and defiance warring in her eyes. Neither did you. They thought they could destroy you. They thought they could silence me. But maybe together, we can prove them wrong. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy. Later that day, Jonathan met with Samuel again to prepare for the lawsuit. They pored over every detail, every witness account, every scrap of evidence. The businessman from seat 3A, Peter Caldwell, had finally agreed to provide a sworn affidavit. His courage was shaky, but he had come through. This will help, Samuel said, sliding the document across the desk. It's one more voice they can't erase. Jonathan read Peter's words carefully. The air marshal acted professionally. The passenger struck him without provocation. He remained calm and never abused his authority. Jonathan exhaled, a quiet gratitude stirring inside him. One by one, people were standing up, but as night fell, the retaliation escalated. Jonathan's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. Drop it or lose everything. We know where you live. He showed it to Samuel the next morning. Samuel's jaw tightened. Classic intimidation tactic. We'll document it and report it. Don't let it shake you. But it did shake him. Not for himself, but for the people around him. Maya, Elena, Peter, they were all in danger because of this fight. That evening, Jonathan sat alone, staring out at the city lights. His thoughts churned. You didn't choose this war, Jonathan, but now you're in it, and if you walk away, you're not just betraying yourself, you're betraying everyone who trusted you to stand tall. His phone rang. It was Maya. Turn on Channel 7, she said, her voice urgent. Jonathan grabbed the remote, flicking to the channel. The screen lit up with a breaking news banner. Exclusive new video emerges from Flight 782. The clip played, clear, unedited, Catherine Doyle's hand striking Jonathan across the face, the audible gasp from passengers, his calm, measured response, the anchor's voice cut in. The video directly contradicts Skyreach's claims. The footage appears authentic and is spreading rapidly across social media. Jonathan sat back, stunned. His chest swelled with relief, but also with a new, sharper fear. The truth was finally out, but the war was about to get bloodier. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Peter. I released it, Peter said, his voice trembling but resolute. They tried to silence me, but I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet. The world needed to see it. Jonathan closed his eyes, gratitude flooding through him. You did the right thing, Peter. No matter what happens, you did the right thing. By midnight, the video had gone viral. Hashtags trended worldwide. Justice 4 miles. Skyreach lies. No one above the law. The tide had turned. But in Richard Doyle's penthouse office, the fury was volcanic. He slammed his fist onto the desk, shattering a crystal glass. Find out who leaked it, he roared at his advisors, and make them pay. Catherine sat on the couch nearby, her face pale, her composure cracking. For the first time, she realized her father's empire might not be enough to protect her. Jonathan, watching the storm unfold online, felt both hope and dread. The truth was out, but the cost was still unknown. He whispered into the quiet of his apartment, almost as if speaking to his father's memory. The storm is breaking. But can I survive what comes next? By dawn the next morning, Jonathan Miles's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in from strangers, allies, journalists, even old friends he hadn't spoken to in years. The video was everywhere on morning talk shows, splashed across news websites, replayed endlessly on social media. He sat at his kitchen table, watching the footage on loop, Catherine Doyle's slap, sharp and undeniable, his own calm voice in response, the look of shock on the passengers' faces. For the first time since that day on the Flight 782, Jonathan felt the weight of humiliation begin to lift. The truth had been seen. It could not be unseen. Maya Chen arrived with bagels and coffee, her energy brisk, her eyes blazing with determination. It's out. Jonathan, the tide's turning. People are angry. They're calling for investigations into Skyreach, into Doyle himself. Jonathan rubbed his temples. That's good, but it also means Richard Doyle will double down. As if on cue, the television flickered with live coverage of a press conference outside Skyreach headquarters. Richard stood at the podium, flanked by lawyers and executives. His voice was smooth, commanding, every word calculated. The so-called video circulating online is misleading and taken out of context. Richard declared, "This is nothing more than a smear campaign against my daughter and this company. We will pursue every legal avenue to protect our reputation and the safety of our passengers." Catherine stood beside him, dressed in muted colors, her expression carefully arranged into pained dignity. The reporters shouted questions, but Richard cut them off. "Skyreach will not be intimidated. We are confident the truth will prevail." Maya scoffed. "He's rattled. That's why he's lashing out." Samuel Vega arrived moments later, carrying a folder under his arm. He dropped it on the table, his tone brisk. Congressional Oversight Committee just announced an inquiry. They want to know if Skyreach systematically covers up complaints, and guess who they want as their first witness? Jonathan stared at him, stunned. Me Samuel nodded. "This isn't just a lawsuit anymore. Jonathan, it's national. You're about to become the face of something much bigger." Jonathan leaned back, the air thick around him. He had never sought the spotlight. His career had been built on invisibility, on moving unnoticed through crowds. Now, he was being thrust into the glare of cameras and congressional hearings. That night, Jonathan walked through his neighborhood, the city buzzing with its usual rhythm. But as he passed a bar, he caught sight of the television inside. The screen showed his own face alongside Catherine's, split-screened with the headline, "Hero or Aggressor Nation Divided Over Air Marshal Confrontation." A group of strangers inside the bar cheered at the footage of Catherine's slap, raising their glasses. Jonathan paused, a strange ache in his chest, hope and fear twisted together. The nation was watching, but not all eyes were kind. Back in Richard Doyle's penthouse, the atmosphere was grim. Richard paced like a caged animal, barking orders at his advisors. "We sue every outlet that runs that video. We threaten advertisers. We smear Miles until he's toxic. I want stories planted financial trouble, disciplinary history, anything. Break him." Catherine sat silently, her confidence crumbling. She whispered, "Daddy, what if people don't believe us anymore?" Richard stopped pacing, his eyes burning. "Then we make them believe, or we destroy the ones who don't." Meanwhile, Elena Brooks sat alone in her apartment, her laptop open to the leaked documents now circulating online. Her phone buzzed with anonymous threats, each one colder than the last. She shut her eyes, fear pressing down on her, but when she thought of Jonathan, of his calm under fire, of his refusal to bend, she steadied herself. She whispered into the silence, "If he can stand, so can I." The next day, Samuel prepped Jonathan for the congressional inquiry. They sat in a conference room, papers spread out, cameras already buzzing outside. "Stay calm," Samuel instructed. "Speak plainly. Tell the truth. Don't let them bait you into anger. Remember, you're not just defending yourself. You're showing the country what dignity looks like under fire." Jonathan nodded, though his stomach churned. He thought of his father, of every lesson etched into him: patience, strength, resilience. He would need all of it. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Lawmakers shuffled papers, microphones crackling as the session began. Jonathan sat at the witness table, his hands folded, his gaze steady. "Mr. Miles," the chairman began, "please recount the events of Flight 782. Jonathan's voice was calm, measured. He told them everything boarding the plane: Catherine's entitlement, her refusal to check her ticket, the slap that followed. He described his own restraint, the weight of choosing dignity over retaliation. Some lawmakers nodded gravely. Others pressed him, probing for cracks. "Why didn't you move seats to avoid confrontation? Did your position as an air marshal make passengers feel intimidated?" Jonathan answered each question steadily, his voice never rising, his composure never breaking. When it was over, the chairman leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Miles. Your testimony has shed much-needed light on this incident. We will be expanding this inquiry." The cameras flashed. The nation had witnessed his calm, his resolve. Outside the hearing room, reporters swarmed. Jonathan moved through them silently, Samuel and Maya shielding him as best they could. That night, headlines exploded across the country: Air Marshal Miles testifies calm under fire. Congress expands probe into Sky Reach. Jonathan sat in his apartment, exhausted but resolute. He knew Richard Doyle wouldn't surrender. The man's empire was built on control, and control was slipping. But for the first time, Jonathan believed the truth had more weight than the lies. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "The storm isn't over, but maybe, just maybe, the winds are shifting." The night after his testimony, Jonathan Miles barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city below. Every word he had spoken before Congress replayed in his head. Each question, each measured answer. He had done his best to stay calm, to speak truth without anger. Yet in the quiet of the night, doubts crept in. Did I sound convincing? Did I say enough? Will they believe me? Or will Doyle twist it all again by morning? The doubts had no room to grow. The headlines filled with praise for his composure, clips of his testimony spreading widely across the internet. Talk show hosts dissected his calm demeanor, contrasting it with Catherine Doyle's theatrical appearances beside her father. Commentators asked pointedly, "If Miles is lying, why hasn't Skyreach released their own unedited footage?" At Samuel Vega's office, the mood was cautiously optimistic. Samuel leaned against his desk, scrolling through updates. "The public's leaning in our favor now. That video, plus your testimony, it's forcing people to see the cracks in Skyreach's story," Maya Chen added. "But Richard Doyle isn't finished. He's too powerful, too ruthless. We need to prepare for his next move." As if on cue, Samuel's phone buzzed. He answered, his brow furrowing. "Yes. What?" When he hung up, his face hard. "They're filing a criminal complaint against you, Jonathan, claiming you abused your authority as a federal officer." Jonathan stiffened. "On what grounds? Fabricated ones," Samuel said flatly. "They'll argue you used your position to intimidate Catherine, that you escalated instead of de-escalating. It's nonsense, but it's dangerous. If prosecutors take the bait, you could be facing charges." Jonathan exhaled slowly, his fists tightening. "So now, I'm not just fighting for my name. I'm fighting for my freedom." The room went still. Meanwhile, in Skyreach's headquarters, Richard Doyle stood in a boardroom surrounded by attorneys. His empire was wobbling, stock prices dipping, congressional inquiries circling like vultures. Rage simmered beneath his polished exterior. "They want a war," Richard said coldly, "so we give them one. I don't care what it costs, bury him. Bury everyone who stands with him." Catherine sat nearby, pale and restless. For days she had avoided looking at the viral video, but the image haunted her, the undeniable proof of her hand striking Jonathan. She felt the eyes of strangers on her everywhere she went. Once adored, she now faced whispers, glares, online mockery. "Daddy," she began softly, her voice trembling, "what if people never forgive me?" Richard turned sharply, his voice steel. "Forget forgiveness. This is about survival. They will believe what I tell them to believe. Now pull yourself together." But Catherine's mask was slipping. Guilt gnawed at her, the cracks widening. Back in Brooklyn. Elena Brooks returned home from work to find her apartment door ajar. She froze, her pulse spiking. Inside, drawers had been rifled through, papers scattered. Her laptop was gone. A note sat on the counter in scrawled handwriting. "Stop before it's too late." Her hand shook as she called Jonathan. He answered on the second ring. "Elena, what happened?" "They broke into my place," she whispered, her voice raw. "They took my laptop. They know it was me." Jonathan's gut twisted. "Get out of there. Go stay somewhere safe tonight." Elena's voice cracked. "I knew this would happen. I thought I was strong enough, but I don't know if I can keep going." Jonathan's tone softened, steady. "You're stronger than you realize. They want you afraid because they know the truth you carry can destroy them. Don't let them win." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Elena whispered, "I'll try." The next morning, news broke that federal investigators had subpoenaed Skyreach's internal records. Elena's documents were now part of an official case. Richard Doyle could no longer contain the story within his walls. The media frenzy intensified. Crowds gathered outside Skyreach offices, chanting for accountability. Protesters held signs, "No justice, no flights," ground Skyreach lies. Jonathan watched from afar, his chest heavy with a mix of hope and fear. He hadn't asked for this movement, yet it was growing around him, fueled by outrage and solidarity, but the pressure was crushing. Every time he stepped outside, cameras followed. Every night, he returned home to new threats in his inbox, and still, the looming possibility of criminal charges shadowed him. One evening, he sat in his apartment with Maya and Samuel. Papers were strewn across the table, strategies scribbled on notepads. "Richard Doyle won't stop," Jonathan said quietly. "He'll burn the world down before he admits the truth." Samuel leaned forward, his voice firm. "Then we make sure the world sees him burn. We don't just defend, we expose. Every lie, every cover-up, we force him into the light." Maya placed a hand on Jonathan's arm, her touch grounding. You've carried this weight with grace, Jonathan, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. We're with you, all the way." Jonathan looked at them both, gratitude softening the storm inside him. "Then, let's finish what we started." Meanwhile, Catherine sat alone in her lavish apartment, the silence suffocating. She scrolled through endless streams of hate online, each comment sharper than the last. For the first time, she wondered if her father's power could truly shield her. Her reflection in the dark window looked back at her eyes hollow, mask cracking. She whispered into the empty room, "What have I done?" The storm was reaching its peak. The battle lines were drawn. And everyone, Jonathan, Elena, Catherine, Richard, was being pushed to the edge. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning in a summer storm. Protesters pressed against barricades, their chants echoing through the morning air. Jonathan Miles adjusted his tie, standing tall as Samuel Vega led him toward the entrance. Maya Chen walked beside him, steady and unflinching. Elena Brooks trailed close behind, nerves etched into her face but fire in her eyes. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Richard Doyle sat at the defense table, his suit crisp, his expression carved from stone. Catherine sat beside him, pale and fragile, her hands clasped tightly together. She avoided Jonathan's gaze. The judge entered, the room rising, then settling into silence. The trial of Miles v. Skyreach Airways and Catherine Doyle had begun. Samuel rose for the opening statement, his voice clear and resonant. "This case is not simply about one slap on one flight. It is about truth versus power. It is about a company that silenced victims and buried evidence. And it is about a man, Jonathan Miles, who endured humiliation with dignity, while others sought to destroy him with lies. We will show you the truth, and when we do, we trust you will deliver justice." Richard Doyle's attorney followed, painting Jonathan as a dangerous authority figure, an unstable air marshal who escalated an innocent misunderstanding. Their words dripped with arrogance, designed to twist the narrative back in their favor. Jonathan sat still, his gaze calm, his chest heavy but steady. He knew the truth didn't need theatrics, it only needed patience. Witnesses took the stand. The gate agent testified, voice trembling but firm, recounting Catherine's entitlement at the boarding door. Peter Caldwell, the businessman from 3A, described what he had seen, his affidavit backed by the unedited video he had courageously released. The jury leaned forward as the footage played on the large screen Catherine's slap, Jonathan's calm restraint. The room rippled with murmurs. Then came Elena Brooks. She stepped to the stand, her hands shaking as she adjusted the microphone. She described years of suppressed complaints, the corporate directives to bury discrimination cases, the memos signed by Richard Doyle himself. When Samuel presented the leaked emails and documents, the courtroom shifted. The veneer of Skyreach's innocence cracked wide open. Richard's lawyer objected furiously, but the evidence stood. The truth was undeniable. Finally, Catherine Doyle herself was called. She walked slowly to the stand, her designer clothes unable to mask the weight dragging her down. Her father's eyes bored into her, demanding loyalty. At first, she recited the rehearsed lines. "I felt threatened. I acted in self-defense. He intimidated me, but under cross-examination, Samuel's steady questions chipped at her facade. Ms. Doyle, is this your hand striking Mr. Miles in the video?" Yes. Did Mr. Miles raise his voice, strike you, or physically threaten you in any way? No. Did you lie in your original statement to protect yourself? Silence. Catherine's eyes darted toward her father. Richard's glare was sharp, commanding, but something inside her broke. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Yes." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Richard slammed his fist on the table, his control unraveling. "Don't you dare," he hissed, but the judge silenced him with a gavel strike. Tears streamed down Catherine's face. "I lied. I was wrong. He didn't threaten me. I hit him because I thought I could get away with it, because I always have." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Samuel seized the moment, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the truth speaks for itself." The trial ended with swift deliberation. The jury returned unanimous guilty of defamation, retaliation, and misconduct. Skyreach was ordered to pay damages. Richard Doyle personally implicated in the cover-up. Outside, the world exploded with headlines: "Justice for Miles," "Doyle Empire Crumbles," "Whistleblower Vindicated." Richard Doyle left the courthouse in disgrace, surrounded by angry shouts. His empire, once untouchable, was crumbling. Catherine, though condemned by many, found a strange relief in confession. For the first time, she had spoken the truth. Jonathan stepped onto the courthouse steps, the crowd roaring his name. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward him. He raised a hand for quiet. "I did not choose this fight," he said, his voice steady, carrying over the noise. "But when it came to me, I chose to stand tall, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been silenced, dismissed, or treated as less than. This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to every passenger who deserves dignity, to every worker who deserves fairness, to every person who believes truth is stronger than lies." The crowd erupted, chants rising like thunder. Jonathan stood for a moment, soaking in the tide of voices. Yet inside, he felt not triumph, but peace. The fight had been brutal, but the truth had survived. Later, in the quiet of his apartment, Jonathan sat by the window, the city lights flickering below. Maya and Samuel joined him. Elena, too. They shared quiet smiles, exhausted but proud. "You did it," Maya whispered. Jonathan shook his head gently. "We did it, together." He looked at the notebook he had filled weeks earlier, the one where he had written every detail, every memory. He closed it softly, knowing the story was no longer just his. It belonged to the world now, and somewhere. He imagined his father's voice again, proud and steady. "Stand tall, son, always stand tall." Jonathan smiled faintly. He had, and he always would. And so, from the moment a single slap echoed through the cabin to the final gavel that shattered an empire of lies, the story of Jonathan Miles reminds us of something timeless. Respect is not a privilege. It is a right. He stood tall when the world tried to cut him down. He endured humiliation without striking back. And in the end, the truth did what power could not, it endured. But his fight was never just about him. It was about the countless voices silenced on flights, in workplaces, in everyday life. It was about the courage to say enough. As you close this chapter, let it leave you not just with anger at injustice, but with hope that dignity, empathy, and courage can still light the darkest corners. What would you have done if you were in that seat? If this story moved you, Make sure to like, share, and subscribe so together we can keep these conversations alive and stand ready for the next story that demands to be told.